Hello everyone, my name is Eliciana Jensen, and this is my Omni poster, Lifting the Veil, an analysis on the Civil War and its impact on spiritualism and deaf culture. Introduction. During the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, there were many casualties that resulted in mass death from combat, mortal wounds, and disease. Soldiers from both the Union and the Confederacy suffered many ailments and were lost to the reality of death. Now, excluding the Confederates, the Union soldiers lost about 360,222 lives. Now, my thesis. The massive loss of life in the Civil War affected the rituals of Northern deaf culture and led to a renewed interest in spiritualism. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is deaf culture and what is spiritualism? If we go right on over here, deaf culture is the rituals of a family based on their religious and cultural background. Now, this can include wakes, funerary customs, the aspect of last rites. In the North, before the Civil War, there were many different religious perspectives, Protestants, Catholics. They all have different aspects of deaf culture, but in the Victorian age in general, they focused on the comforts of the deceased and bedside manner. So Northern deaf culture before the war centered around comfort and the recognition of last words. As we can see in figure 1, the bedside vigil. It was the family's duty to make sure that their loved one passing on was comfortable and they had the recognition of their last words. Now, what is spiritualism? Spiritualism is the belief and practice in the communication with the spirits of the dead. Now, unlike prayer, prayer is more of talking to a deity or a god figure. Spiritualism is the communication with a deceased loved one that people believe are not of this mortal realm anymore. They are nearby, but not alive anymore. And spiritualism communication usually is through seances and the presence of a medium as seen in figure 2. Now, why was there a resurgence of spiritualism during the Civil War? Well, due to the heat of battle, many wounded and dead left on the field were left on the field and oftentimes buried in mass graves. Families did not see their loved ones ever again. They did not have the old version of deaf culture recognizing their last words. Spiritualism was a way to comfort them, to bring them to the reality that they had lost their loved ones and regain last words again through seance. And if you look at figure 3, this is an example of a mass grave to show the gravity of how many did die during the war, and especially the gravity for how many died for the Union side. Now, leading on to deaf culture, how was Northern deaf culture affected on a familial level by the Civil War? Well, since they did not have their loved one in their presence when they died and did not hear their last words, they were left in this aspect of denial and grieving. Oftentimes, families did not know that their loved one had passed. If they had, they were usually left with their letters would stop. That's how they would find out. And they went for months not knowing if they were really dead. I do have this quote by Anna M.E. Holston, a field nurse, when she did witness this grief and denial. This is a wife realizing that her husband died. She came in a hurry as soon as she knew her husband was in the battle, only to find him dead and buried 2 days before her arrival. Unwilling to believe the fact, she still insisted upon seeing him. She insisted so much that she had his comrades exhume him to see his dead body to believe. They had seeing to believe their loved one was really gone. Now, moving on to battlefield death culture, because the families weren't the only ones experiencing loss. Regiments tended to look for their own if they had noticed a soldier missing after a battle. So typically, if you're in a regimental basis and one of your comrades goes missing, they would look for your body and oftentimes bury you with others in your regiment if you had died. It was their way of honoring the dead and grieving. And some bodies were left out there for days on time, even the wounded. I have this quote from Sergeant Calvin A. Haynes of the 125th New York Infantry. He describes that night and the next day the Rebs retreated, leaving their dead and wounded on the field. There were so many wounded that it was impossible to attend to all of them, some of them laying 48 hours in the drenching rain. Oftentimes, because of weather or because of the circumstances, some casualties had wounded had to be left on the battlefield, but most times they would make an effort to retrieve their dead and wounded so their bodies would not be ravaged by nature or opposing forces. Now, when they would retrieve their comrades and bury them, their grieving and honoring was also an aspect of survivor's guilt and the want of being recognized. If they had passed, they would want someone to do the same for them. It was their way of getting past the tremendous amount of loss. And as you see in figure 4, this is an example of a Union battlefield burial and their recognition of death. Now, going on to the historical significance. So the new death culture of guilt and denial was combated with the movement of spiritualism. It is key to know that spiritualism helped relieve grief and denial by giving friends and family the recognition of last words, knowing that their loved one was in a better place and not just gone forever. They had still communication with them. And of course, deaf culture was forever changed by the Civil War because oftentimes families now did not have a body to bury. So there was still feelings of grieving and loss, and spiritualism just helped aid a little bit of that. So spiritualism leading into the 1900s, there was at least 11 million new spiritualists, and the number of people reported to be practicing mediums is approximately 35,000 during the 19th century. So there is statistical evidence showing the resurgence of spiritualism. Now, leading on to the conclusion. Overall, the Civil War was one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. Counting both the Union and the Confederacy, there is about 622,000 lives lost. And if you compare every other American conflict, it's about 644,000. So the Civil War was the bloodiest American conflict because both sides were Americans fighting Americans, and a lot of people did die, and there was a lot of grief and devastation, and that's one reason why spiritualism took a high rise after this conflict. And that is my Omni presentation. This right here is my works cited. I hope you all have a wonderful day.